People say that the role of high alpha slow vehicles that have a big gun are completely not in the question with the release of vehicles like, for example, the Turan, or maybe even stealthy vehicles like the Waffle Panzer IV in the German line. But today we're going to prove them wrong by playing one of the oldest vehicles that has been in World of Tanks. This is the T-30, the Tier 9 American tank destroyer that has a huge gun. It's pretty slow and the armor really only works on the turret. But how can a tank like this actually do well in the game? We're going to break down the statistics of the vehicle, how you play slower tanks with higher alpha damage, and the potential to hopefully use the armor in the way that it's supposed to make that lack of speed worth it. And because of that fact, we're hopefully going to have a look at the T-30 today, which is the key topic of today's video. And part of the T110E4 series that we've been doing, we've already looked at the T28 prototype and the T25/2, and we'll be looking at some of the other tanks on the line for a full breakdown of the T110E4 line, which I think is a great place for people to start learning how to use these high alpha tank destroyers with a little bit of armor. So with that in mind, today's video looks at the 155mm AT gun T7 on the T30, the big 155mm. Now there is potential that you may want to use the 120mm, which features a better rate of fire, a considerably better rate of fire, and a much better DPM overall. But the T30, it's all about having that big 750 alpha damage boomstick, which hopefully will be showcased off in the gameplay portion of this video, where we'll kind of cover some of the topics that we cover in the statistics and the characteristics of a tank like this and how you can kind of kit them out to have better games in general. And hopefully you'll learn a thing or two, or maybe find out a bit more about how you can play these sorts of tanks, which is what we're focusing on in this next kind of couple of months within World of Tanks console, so you can get educated, or at least maybe do better, or maybe just find it funny to watch my setups and you absolutely despise them. Either way, we'll be having a look at the T30 today. So straight off the bat, the T30 has this 750 alpha damage gun with the top gun on its package. This one features 0.35 accuracy in how that we've actually set up the tank. Now, guaranteed that this is not actually the base value of the accuracy, but this is how we've kitted out the tank. We are going to pop in a commander into it, and we can run down what we do with this sort of tank when I do actually play in the game. So we're going to run this commander. It's kind of the more traditional build for a heavy tank with high alpha, and essentially that is what the T30 is. You almost have to play it like a heavy tank with high alpha, because of the fact that if you don't go front line with a vehicle like this, you're going to find up that you're going to end up with a lot less damage. And although you don't have to YOLO with a tank like this, you're going to find if you snipe from the back for too long, you just miss out on a lot of game and a lot of damage at the end of the game even than you would if you actually went in towards the beginning and used a superior position for your vehicle. So straight off the bat, of course, we've now popped in our commander, so we have the maximum bonuses that we can with the setup that we go with. So you can see accuracy has come down considerably by putting in a commander. We'll run through those perks and why we choose certain perks on a tank like this. So hopefully you can kind of use that throughout the entirety of all of the lines. But there we go, 0.29 accuracy on a 155mm main armament. And considering that this isn't that fast, that accuracy is actually pretty consistent throughout whether you're moving or, you know, stationary. Obviously, when you're moving, you're going to get way worse accuracy. But considering that the top speed of the vehicle is 35 kilometers an hour base, and we're not changing that, we're not putting any speed boost equipment in the T30, having 0.29 accuracy with a pretty decent bloom because of the speed. You know, if you're going 70 kilometers an hour, your bloom on your accuracy is going to be way higher than when you're slower. And so you can often hit on the move with this vehicle, which is actually quite nice. And sometimes you've kind of forced into firing on the move in some positions where maybe you just don't have time to fully aim. So we'll get into that during the gameplay and where you do it, where you don't do it, that sort of thing, and when it is worth to fire on the move or when it is worth to actually fire your vehicle when you're thinking about, am I going to be able to fire in the next 10 seconds or whatever it might be. So with that being said, the base reload is pretty much about 18 to 19 seconds on the T30, which brings it down all the way to 14.93 with the perks and equipment that we've got in the tank. This tank features a 10 degrees of gun depression, which is actually pretty good. You can use it on ridge lines, and given that the armor model of this tank is set up such that you have to really use ridge lines, or at least get hold down to make the armor work, it works quite well in tandem. Like, it's not a IS-7 where you're limited on the gun depression and so can't use all of the positions to your advantage to get the turret armor working. This one really does utilize that turret armor, as well as being able to actually use the main armament, which is what this tank's all about. So obviously you can see we 3-marked this thing. It was 3-marked a long time ago when I actually used to care about marking vehicles and had the time to do so. So recently haven't been focusing on anything like that. Just purely based on trying to upload multiple videos on various different tanks and just not having the ability to play 150 games or 100 games or 80 games in vehicles dependent on the tier to 3-mark them. But either way, in terms of equipment, we are running this with advanced optics. As I say in most of my videos, advanced optics is really crucial for being able to compete with the lighter or medium tanks in the game, so that you aren't just continuously getting outspotted and fired upon without spotting them back. So advanced optics will boost this up, and with most of these sorts of builds, having that extra view range really does help out, and you will spot vehicles that are firing at you a lot easier than if you're not taking this advanced optics. So that's kind of why I always suggest using it, and view range on console is really important in World War II, because at the end of the day you have no ability to spot anyone if you don't have the view range, and you can often end up getting farmed quite easily if you don't have the view range as well by people who are using the view range advantages that you get from having better view range and better concealment. And considering that the T30 is no small vehicle, I mean this tank is absolutely gigantic to a degree, yeah, you're not going to be remaining undetected for particularly a huge amount of the game. So with that being said, we have 497 meters of view range, which for the most part is more than enough for almost every single kind of potential option of trying to spot people. You're not going to be able to outspot light tanks if they have really good still concealment, but you are going to be able to spot quite a few vehicles with this tank, especially if they fire at you in bushes, etc. So that's why having the view range is big. We've got ventilation for an increase of crew performance of 5%. It's not necessarily the most crucial equipment slot. It's kind of up for debate. It's one of those things that is essentially going to be able to buff up your tank in a lot of areas, but the buffs that is going to give you are quite small. But the 5% crew performance is nice to have as a general rule, increasing your damage per minute, increasing your repair speed, increasing your view range by small amounts, and all of those sorts of bonuses on a tank like this is quite nice. The only problem with it is that you don't get any of the speed boost equipment because you've maxed out basically the 3 equipment slots. People do always comment on my videos, well, you could drop out the kind of enhanced targeting info, but the problem with this is that yes, if you're experienced at the game, you'll know the weak points, but mainly my enhanced target info isn't about actually being able to, you know, see where I need to aim at things. You'll get that over time, and yes, you could potentially warrant dropping it, but the kind of additional stuff that you get from this is that you're able to see people through bushes. So if you know that there's a tank behind a bush, if you don't have enhanced target info, you're not going to be able to get the outline, and so you're going to be missing shots, and you're going to be finding it very difficult to hit people behind cover because you just don't get the outline. You've got to rely on being able to see, and when they're behind a bush, you can't actually see the tanks often, so you're just going to end up having to hit and hope that you hit the weak points, especially against like heavy tanks on the enemy team. You know, if you don't actually hit their weak points, sometimes you're going to bounce, or maybe you just completely miss. So that's why I always run enhanced target info. It's not because of the fact that you can see the penetration chance, it's purely about being able to utilize the outline feature within the game, and I think that is very underestimated, because I tried running without enhanced target info on things like light tanks, because for the most part, you know, you're quite up close and personal when you're dealing a lot of damage because you're going around them, whereas with a tank like this, you're probably not going to want that. So yeah, that's why I always run enhanced target info for those situations where you've got to fire at someone across the map, or you know, they're very close to outside your render range. And so yeah, it's very, very important for me anyway as a player to use that piece of equipment. But with that being said, obviously we're also running advanced loader. This is going to buff up our DPM, and when you're in a tank that has a big gun, having better DPM is going to be almost a must, because a lot of the situations you'll find yourself in with a tank that has a longer reload because it has a big gun is that people know that, and they're going to come around much quicker, and they're going to farm you for multiple hits every time you fire. So when you know that you've got a big reload, you want to get that down as much as possible so that if people do decide to YOLO you, or maybe they do know about your reload, they're going to find it a lot harder to get in lots of shots into you in one go without you being able to do anything. So yeah, reducing that time between when you're actually able to kind of combat the tank that you might be facing, that's going to be very, very good. So obviously that's why we run an advanced loader. So there are potential options for maybe using traction system, or maybe even using advanced powertrain. In terms of the kind of power to weight ratio of the vehicle, that is kind of where you'll figure out whether it's worth using the max speed bonuses that you get with traction system versus powertrain, and that is because essentially if you have a very low power to weight ratio, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually get up to top speed. So if you have very low power to weight ratio, you're going to find that getting a 10% increase to your speed is not actually that beneficial, because you're not really going to be able to reach that top speed because it's very, very slow and very gradual to get up to there, which is where having the engine power and the top speed becomes more of a impact. Now, there is obviously an additional bonus with traction system that comes alongside max speed, and that is that you'll get a chassis and hull rotation speed, which for non-turreted tanks is very, very useful, especially if you've got a very poor power to a very poor hull rotation speed. And the T30 does to a degree. 20 degrees a second is not amazing, but when you combine it that it has a turret and is able to turn that at the same time, you really don't find that many situations where you feel like you're getting kind of out-traversed. And often the way in which you're playing this tank is not going to lead you to being in an open field where people can go all the way around you. You're playing it in the heavy tank areas and trading with a lot of heavy tanks. So that's kind of how you typically play the T30 and why I choose the equipment that I do. So just for your own knowledge and kind of understanding. So when you play other tanks that aren't just this one, you'll kind of get a feel for what sort of equipment you should potentially be using and the logic behind why you would want to use it. Say if I had a power to weight ratio that looked something, in the region of like 19 on the T30, then I would be more inclined to actually get the speed boost just so that I can be faster in general. Whereas when you've got 12.4, it's kind of that lower end range where it's not going to benefit you that much other than the traverse speed. But with that being said, what's great about the T30's big gun is that you do get 276 penetration, which typically when you have a big gun, you got a big penetration. So that's always good. 276 mil is more than enough to go through most tanks just firing the standard ammunition. Of course, if you then decide that you're not going to be able to realistically pen people, you can use the APCR rounds, which this tank gets as its premium ammunition, that deal 320 penetration and with the same alpha. So it purely is a case of kind of choosing the ammunition that you think is needed at the time. It's not really crucial. A lot of tanks you can pen with 276 anyway. Even the super heavies, their weak points are typically not enough to be able to kind of reliably bounce 276 millimeters unless it's a very well angled tank or someone knows what they're doing or they're hiding their weak point. So that is the point at which you might fire some premium rounds. And of course, if you just genuinely just want to be able to go through upper plates of almost every single tank in the game, then 320 pen might be the option that you want to go with. But it is fairly expensive to be able to do it, costing 4,800 silver per shell. But that is the trade-off between whether you want to maximize the tank or just play it how you want to play it to earn a little bit of silver alongside having a bit of fun. Of course, premium ammunition APCR means that you are going to have increased shell velocity, which makes tracking targets at longer ranges. So if they're out in a field somewhere and they're pelting it along the battlefield at like 70, it's a lot easier to hit when you have better ammo speed, because you don't have to lead your shells in front of the tank as much, because it's traveling to the point at which you're going to hit the tank much quicker. So you don't have to give it as much of a delay between when your shell is fired and when it hits the opponent. So that's where APCR comes in as kind of a secondary use of using premium rounds as well. So it's kind of a bit of a mashup between using both of the rounds as you see fit, and whether or not you want to spend the silver to do it. Obviously, at the minute, we've got a lot of silver, so it doesn't really matter in terms of which rounds we're using. It's just purely, do I feel like I want to use some extra rounds? And that is just basically the borderline. I would typically run 15-15 just for those really tough matches. Maybe you're getting really close to having a 10k game or something, and you find that you come up against a super heavy, they know what they're doing. It could be the difference between getting an extra 1,500 damage and getting, you know, nothing. So yeah, in those sorts of games, it's nice to have the opportunity to fire those premium rounds if you need them. And that is basically all premium rounds are. They're just more of a guarantee to pen a lot of tanks, and shouldn't be used exclusively as the only round unless you're really trying to min-max the tank to get 4 marks or something like that. And sometimes if it's a heat round as your secondary round, you'll actually find that sometimes you can actually get kind of shafted by using the heat rounds because of the fact that they don't deal damage if they hit a track or a spaced armor part of a vehicle. They get absorbed, they can't go through it. And although AP and APCR will have to penetrate through the screen or the tracks as well as the armor behind it, sometimes you'll pen using AP versus heat ammunition, even though, you know, the fact that your penetration is lower with your AP/APCR than your heat rounds. So that's kind of a brief overview of ammunition, and typically tanks are like this. Of course, we want to be able to run this tank with a commander that has somewhat decent skills. Now, this hasn't been fully kitted out to the tank itself, but this is a good general build for playing heavy tanks and tanks with high alpha that typically play that tank destroyer role, and kind of are more brawly tanks that have a little bit of armor rather than your Guerrilla 15s or your Tyrans and stuff that rely on having the speed and the camo to avoid taking shells. You have to use some of the different perks to make it worth it. So in terms of how we're running the T30, we've got 6th Sense, obviously, Born Leader, very, very crucial. We've covered it in loads of videos, so if you want to have a look at it and what it exactly does, I would highly recommend going and checking out my How to Get Better at World Tank series that we've got as a playlist on the channel. It covers loads of different topics, from spotting to camo to crew skills, like basically everything that you could need to know. So I highly recommend going and checking that out if you're interested. As far as actual perks that are specific to this tank, we got rapid loading, obviously, for 10% increase to reload. As I said earlier, reload is king when you have a high alpha damage tank because you want to minimize it. You've got a steady aim for increased accuracy, because typically the bigger the gun, the worse the accuracy, typically, and therefore 10% more accuracy is just going to allow us to hit shots from further away and with better accuracy. Track mechanic, this is a nice one to have. Not crucial, but I like running it in my more brawling tanks, because if you do get tracked or double tracked, you're going to be able to repair a lot quicker, 25% in fact. And with the Brothers in Arms or Born Leader skill, you're also going to be able to repair a lot quicker. So it's nice to have as a benefit to playing a tank that is more likely to get tracked, especially with these American tanks, because they've got very big tracks. So when you have that, you want to make sure that you can repair those tracks as fast as possible. Snapshot, increased accuracy during turret rotation. Obviously, we have turret in this tank, and 12% more accuracy when we're moving is going to allow us to hit on the move, because your turret might be moving at the same time that you're moving if the target is in the same place. Of course, then you also got the benefit of if there's multiple tanks in front of you and maybe you can't hit one, you can turn to another one without blooming out your accuracy too much. So having a bigger circle of accuracy, so it will stay smaller as you kind of move between targets, which is obviously a benefit, and you don't have to aim as long to guarantee a hit. Now, situational awareness, this is for view range. As I said earlier, I run this on basically every single one of my tanks, regardless of what it is. Maybe not artillery, because I mean, it's just artillery, but 6% more view range is going to be able to allow you to spot people from further away, as we said earlier. 10% increased accuracy when moving using run and gun is once again very useful for a more brawling tank because you're up close and personal. You're usually moving quite a lot when you're up in the front lines as opposed to sitting sniping with something like a Waffle Panzer IV. So having the run and gun is really nice for that increased accuracy when you're moving around a corner or whatever and you need to do a quick snapshot. The increased accuracy is very, very beneficial for that. And then camo expertise, this is probably more of a thing that isn't so beneficial, but at the same time it's nice to have that increased camo so that you don't get spotted as easily, and it's usually worth it in that middle of the game to the late game where the tanks are spread out a bit more and you have a bit more flexibility to move around the map, and it just increases that disparity between your view range and your camo factor. So the bigger the view range that you can get and the smaller the camo still concealment is, the better you're going to be at being able to spot tanks. You could have a tank with 700 meters of vision range if there was no view range cap, which there is, but that's a topic for a completely separate video. But say you had 700 meters view range and you had a 400 meters detectability range, that would be better than if you had 250 view range and no still concealment. If it worked in the way that, you know, it was to do with the difference between the two. So that's kind of how this tank works. Obviously, that would change your engagement distance. So if you've got 700 meters of view range and 400 meters of still concealment, you would have to be further away, but you would spot them from further away. Whereas if you've got higher still concealment, you can spot people from a closer range without them spotting you, but equally that distance between when they spot you and when you spot them is about the same, dependent on like the difference between the two. That's kind of how camo works in World of Tanks, and if you follow that general principle, you'll learn how spotting works, and there's a few nuances to it and stuff like that. But we're not going to get into it in this video, as this is a brawling tank and we're not going to be sat sniping and trying to use camo in a tank that is a brawler. So now it's time for the actual gameplay portion of today's video, where we get to put some of these things and ideas into practice. And the first game that we have is on Karelia. Now this is a map that is somewhat useful for a T30 whilst also being a little bit difficult to guarantee that you're going to have a good game, because ultimately you're not fast enough to take the hill area, and you're also going to be quite slow to be able to get into A1 area, where you can also use that portion of the map and kind of take the A line all the way to their base, etc. So we're going to take the kind of dip in H9 and H0, whereby, you know, we can stay a little bit further away at the beginning to try and get off one shot, maybe even two, and then we can kind of move from there. So when you're playing a tank like this, ultimately when you've got high alpha, you want to get at least one shot off for free at the beginning of every single one of your games. It puts a lot of the pressure off of you, and you should be able to actually deal with a lot of the tanks that are kind of coming into the game. Now when we're playing in a tank like this, we don't want to overcommit. When you overcommit in a slow reload vehicle, you're going to get punished quite hard. So what we do here is analyze who's gone up the hill. There's a lot of vehicles in our team that have gone up the hill, or at least are there. So the likelihood of the enemy team taking the hill at this point in G7 is very unlikely, because you can already see that the enemy team have been driven off of the hill in this AMX kind of 30 there. So with that being said, he's been driven off the hill. He's going to be a goner in a second as we finish him off for the first shell of the game, and we can push to this location. Now there's a few misplays that I make in this game, which is why I want to showcase this sort of game to you guys, because at the end of the day, not everyone can have the perfect game all of the time, and the whole point of featuring tanks like this is to showcase, you know, how you can play it better, and maybe even play it way better than me, and you'll be telling me how to play the T30 later on down the line if you're good enough or whatever, or maybe you have a lot more experience playing the T30 than I do. And if you do, then let me know in the comment section down below how else you would alter the playstyle of a tank like this. But you can see here, what I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to overcommit. The whole point in peeking here is to spot what is around me. Now we're getting out spotted, and you can see me checking the team list. I'm seeing what sort of tanks would have the view range to be able to remain undetected, whilst also being able to spot me at the same time. And there are a few tanks that could do it, but the most likely candidate is something like, for example, the STRV, the 103B, so that's the tier 10 Swedish TD. That tank has unbelievably good camo and also very, very, very solid view range. So what we want to do is avoid poking around that corner to my right. So that's why I'm poking this corner. We're less likely to get spotted. Now, even though we pull around this corner, I very underestimate how quickly the reload, or how slow we're actually able to pull around the corner with this tank. It is not a good one at being able to do quick peeks and stuff like that, because you're very slow. Not to say you can't do it, you just have to be very wary of when you over peak, etc. So you can see I take a hit here. It's for about 400 to 390. It's probably the STRV or a tank similar with that sort of caliber. You can usually work it out based on how much damage you've taken. The hard part is if you take multiple shells, etc. can be a little bit more difficult, but you can see me here getting spotted. So that would indicate there's someone directly in front where I'm looking now and where my barrel is pointed, because there's no way we would get spotted by someone behind the rock, obviously. Well, you would hope so. If it was the case, then there'd be something wrong with the game, which, you know, maybe there is. But at the same time, we're basing it off of the logic. So with that being said, what we can do here is try to use the actual turret armor of the T30. Now, the T30 isn't invulnerable to being able to use its turret, even when you are using the gun depression. And we get punished really hard here. And that's because they could actually see the hull armor of the vehicle. And so not ideal. You see a shot straight into the upper plate. You're also seeing one into the side of the turret there, which is probably because the STRV hit us in the turret. In tier 10 games, which this one is, your turret is a bit weak as soon as you start moving it towards different directions. You can see me here. I realise, this is not an ideal situation. The STRV is probably looking at me, and if he hits that cupola on the top of our tank, we can get taken out really easily here. So with the penetration that the STRV gets, it's very, very solid. So we kind of have to be a little bit wary. So what do we do here? Well, we have to play quite passively. And when you're playing in a tank like this, a lot of people will try and overcommit, get rushed, and they're kind of thinking, I really need to poke out from a corner and deal some damage because, yeah, maybe you haven't had the best game in the world. 2,800 damage in a T30 that can deal 750 damage per shell. It isn't the best. So you've got to be kind of very wary, and you can see me here. If I had a little bit more hit points, if I didn't lose my hit points by pulling out stupidly in this game, we'd be able to kind of survive, and we could take a hit in order to get some more damage at the end of the game. So preserving your hit points in this sort of tank, or at least having, you know, between 400 to 800 hit points at the end of the game, is going to allow you to be more flexible when it comes to trying to get that final bit of damage. We could have quite easily pushed this heavy tank if we had a little bit more kind of hit points left to trade at the end of the game, which we don't, so we're going to have to deal with it. And you can see here, we waited patiently. We're not going to push around. I don't want to get taken out because 9 times out of 10, this STRV probably would have finished me off before I could make it towards the enemy heavy tank. And of course, he wasn't on the most amount of hit points anyway, so we just wait for the STRV, and right out of the bat, at the end of the game, we pick up 2 shells on the STRV to pick up a pretty okay game. In the T30, we pick up 5.1 thousand combined damage, there or thereabouts, and come top of the team, even though we didn't have a perfect game by any standards of measurement in a heavy / tank destroyer with a big gun. So that's kind of showcases a lot. There's probably quite a bit to unpack in this game. It certainly wasn't the best game that you could possibly hope for, but that's kind of where I'm trying to go with some of these videos, is to show both the good and the bad, because not everything is good all of the time. So yeah, that's it's a very, very good introduction to the T30 and this sort of playstyle. It is not for everyone. It takes a lot of patience, and if you're a very, very aggressive player that likes to kind of get up close and personal and be feeling like you have an impact all of the time, probably playing a high alpha TD is not going to be what you actually want to do. You'd probably be better off suited to a more armored medium than a tank like this that maybe has 400 alpha instead of the 750. That being said, of course you can run the smaller gun on this thing, but it isn't quite the T30, is it, if you're not dealing 750 damage hits. So that's kind of what I went for when I was 3 marking this thing back in the day. It probably was years ago at this point. So yeah, we're significantly down on the marks just based on not having played it in any recent time, and the damage requirements back in the day were a lot less than they are now, or at least reduced because of the fact we have all of the benefits to DPM and stuff like that over time than we used to, because the perk system, the equipment, that wasn't quite as kind of advanced, and so we didn't have as many benefits to your damage per minute. So damage games typically have gone up, the requirements, considering that a lot of people complaining about the actual overall player-based knowledge and stuff like that. So either way, we're going to try and showcase a little bit more on this map, because this is a more T30 based map, and much like the previous, it doesn't go stellar. We certainly make some more mistakes in this game, and yeah, it's just about playing and learning and trying out these tanks. It's been a long time since I played the T30, and certainly you can have good games, and I can guarantee you we could have better games than these, but yeah, it's going to be a case of trying to learn from those sorts of experiences and being able to adapt quickly to how tanks have evolved over time. And with a tank like this, you can't be sniping at the back. At least, yes, you can have occasionally good games, but it's not what the tank is about. And I really want to stress that. You can see me here trying to push up towards this area. There is no artillery, so that's a good benefit. You see me here make the first mistake, which is auto-aiming. In all fairness, I was shocked that I didn't actually pen the Patriot here. Maybe we hit a really weird angle when we were auto-aiming, but if we did actually aim, we guaranteed wouldn't have actually bounced that one. But yeah, it's one of those things where you hope that you don't bounce when you're in that sort of situation, but there is the possibility of doing it, and so aiming when you can is definitely the way to go. I was just too lazy. So point number 1, always make sure you aim when you have the opportunity to do so. Now we can see someone is firing from the bushes, and you can see here that there is a rock that's typically over there, and so we know that this is a position. So when you have high alpha and when you see that rounds are coming in from positions, you can blind fire just like any other tank, except when you hit someone you're dealing 691 as opposed to the 400 that you normally would with a medium, or maybe even less. So it is worth it sometimes, especially if there's nothing really presenting itself to you, and so you have to take advantage of that from time to time. Don't go blind firing all of the time, but when you're in a tank like this, it's certainly more reliable to pen things as well. So we don't really want to push around to take out the Patriot. He's probably going to be out of the game pretty quick anyway, being on 1 hit point. And you can see here, it looks like we hit the Leopard. There you go with a little snapshot. I don't know what is also around there. There could be a high alpha TD. We haven't checked the matchup at this moment in time, so we don't know what is actually left in the game in terms of TD wise, and you never know, we could get punished really hard for the sake of, 700 damage. We could lose 1,000, 1,200 if multiple tanks are back there. Not to say that there would be, but you never really know. You could see there the T30's back of the turret is somewhat bouncy if you don't aim properly. So we wanted to guarantee the pen, so we just make sure we hit the flatter part of the back of the turret, since it's quite well rounded and there are some weird bounce angles that you can actually get hit in, and bounce from the turret, even from the back. So with that being said, we can start pushing forward, and as I always say, when you're in a slow tank, you have to be very, very kind of snap decision where you decide to push forward. If you're slow in pushing forward, you're going to be left out of the damage much quicker than all of the other tanks in the game, because of the fact that they're faster. They're going to get to the positions quicker, so you have to get there, you have to start going to those positions much faster to be able to get the damage or to push into a position. Not to say you YOLO, you just have to be smart about when you actually start moving, otherwise you're just going to be left in the dirt. So we've picked up 2.8k damage. We've also picked up a bit of assistance in this game and kind of salvaged somewhat of a okay game. And you can see here we're just trying to get the last shot on this object 416, picking up just over 3,000 damage in this game. And because we're slow and maybe we should have moved earlier, we don't have the best game in the world. But at the end of the day, we only hit 5 shells and did 3,000 damage. And you can see where I'm going with the alpha and how it is really fun. And provided that you find yourself up against lots of tanks that are heavy tanks that are in front of you, you can have exceptional games. I'm talking 6,000, 7,000 damage games in the T30, and they come across quite often if you have the ability to kind of utilize that, the experience. And certainly this tank is a decent one to kind of get to grips with playing the high alpha and having a decent turret and getting hold down. So hopefully that gives you an indication as to how you can play the tanks, some of the misplays that we made and that you don't have to make. And yeah, hopefully it will be a good addition to the how to get better at World of Tanks and gameplay and tank reviews playlist that we've got going on at the minute, and should be part of our T110E4 full tech tree line review. This tank is definitely a very, very fun one, probably not the most competitive, but at the end of the day, playing World of Tanks, hopefully you're playing it for fun, and this one is sure a bundle of fun, which is why we went ahead and 3-marked it ages ago. So yeah, I really enjoyed playing this tank. It was a fun one, and hopefully you'll enjoy playing it and have some great results and probably better ones than I showcased in today's video. So let me know in the comment section down below what your highest damage game is in the T30 if you've played it, or maybe you've taken a lot of these things out and you think that they're terrible. Let me know in the comment section down below. But other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day and you join me back in some more videos where we do exactly the same thing but for loads of tanks in the game, and of course the news and update videos and kind of comparisons of different tanks and stuff like that. And so join me back by subscribing and liking the video if you did. And if you've made it this far, you're an absolute Chad. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.